Earths Mightiest Heroes first season does a fairly good job of giving us a Tony Stark that doesn't grow very much throughout the show, but is still enjoyable to watch and engaging. Something that I feel personally his own TV show, Iron Man Armored Adventures, failed at. So I thought it was a really good look at the character, and there's a reason I put perfect on that title. But I would argue the second season is somehow even better. And it all starts with Tony being reduced to having far less technology than he's used to. His brand new shiny suit that he wore all of season 1 is completely destroyed, he has no backups outside of older models, and the suit he made over with the dwarves to fight Loki, they said they had to keep that shit. So he's kind of out of luck when it comes to that. But this first episode, more so, is about establishing that Tony is just more of the same. He's really still just a rich prick, and in a sort of lovable Robert Downey Jr. way and not like a comic book Iron Man way. This episode also serves to broaden our horizons for the Marvel Universe, something Season 2 does a lot more of than the first season does, starting off with the fact that the Fantastic Four are front and center in the very first episode of this season, which gives Tony finally another genius to bounce off of that isn't just Bruce Banner, who's practically non-existent from the show outside of being in Hulk's head. It also helps to fill the void that Hank Pym no longer has, being the team's resident second genius, considering he's gone MIA in favor of no longer being a superhero. The main threat for this episode is all about Doctor Doom and his Doom bots, as Doctor Doom is trying to kidnap Susan Storm, presumably because, just like Namor, this dude has an infallible crush on her, and everybody just assumes, Tony included, that Susan Storm wants anybody other than Mr. Fantastic. But Mr. Fantastic does not play about his wife, bro. Just so don't even try it. And while definitely like a fun opening episode, it doesn't have very much significance on Iron Man's part of the story until the end of the episode, in which Iron Man decides to destroy a piece of Doctor Doom's technology that'll be important like 12 episodes from now. The following episode, Technovore, I feel does a lot better at setting up what is going to be Tony's core character arc throughout the entirety of the rest of this show. And it all stems to the idea of what is his future going to be remembered for? What is Tony Stark? And more aptly, what are the Avengers going to be remembered for when he is no longer there? Tony at this point has dedicated so much of his life to being Iron Man that Pepper's worried about him because he's practically not even running Stark Industries anymore.
If Stark Industries fails, they will too.
What do you want me to do, Pepper?
Your life has become Iron Man 24/7.
That is not true. I'm in the office now, right? No Iron Man, no Avengers.
Throughout this entire episode, it's worth noting that Tony is basically armorless and only has a device that he's making for Captain America, which is Cap's new shield. Again, really love that he's doing that. It's pretty cool. Regardless, Iron Man himself is being challenged by Maria Hill. Maria Hill wants, and has always wanted to, make the Avengers a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. Basically, registration. It's an idea from Civil War in which heroes would be monitored, kept on file, constantly looked over and checked over. Sounds like a good idea in practice, like on paper, but in practice, it's a terrible idea. It is a really bad idea. But that in and of itself is a video for another day. Maria Hill essentially brings up the fact that the Avengers are potentially spurring on a lot of the villains that they see on a weekly basis at this point, and that they're not doing enough to help the people. As a matter of fact, the Avengers are causing more problems than they are solutions. And while Tony is more than fine taking a lot of these risks himself, and his team taking these risks, Maria Hill continuously brings up the idea that he is putting people that never signed up for this in positions to be put at risk, much like Pepper. Pepper spends a majority of this episode in AIM custody simply because she knows Tony Stark and happened to be inside of the building when AIM decided that they not only wanted to steal all of Iron Man's data, technology, and anything he has, but also that they wanted to unleash Technovore, a literal living virus that does nothing but consume technology, specifically arc reactor technology. The episode itself has some pretty cool moments. We get to see, first of all, Tony Stark using Captain America's new, like, laser shield. It really reminds me of the one from Avengers Heroes of Tomorrow. Either way, really, really cool idea. But also, we get to see our first look at War Machine. I would talk more about War Machine, but there's nothing to say. Like, Rhodey's just kind of there in a few episodes. He doesn't really have much to do or say, and especially regarding Tony. Another thing this episode does is it introduces us to Season 2's Iron Man suit design, which I've never been a fan of the triangle arc reactor. I've always liked the circle. That's just me, though. And while the team does go on to save the day, this episode is far more about reminding Tony that his job and what he does puts people at risk that he never wanted to, nor never thought would be put at risk, because none of them agreed to be taking these risks. Look at the risks Rhodey's now taking and choosing to undertake being War Machine, because somebody has to protect Stark Industries while Tony isn't there, especially against these threats. Pepper is literally being kidnapped by AIM. This entire episode is just planting that seed of doubt in Tony Stark's mind and getting him to question what the Avengers' future looks like. Also includes a lot of Maria Hill just being Maria Hill in this show. She's just really mean sometimes, man.
This doesn't change anything. Registration is going to happen.
This was the part where you were supposed to thank me for saving your life.
You don't get it. I saved your life because that's my job. But you're putting people at risk. The Avengers put people at risk.
And this is all made worse and amplified by the fact that right now, Tony Stark is technically the leader of the Avengers. A lot of the first season's arc was setting Tony Stark up to be the leader of the Avengers, and it did a really good job at doing so, but in season 2 they're exploring how being the leader for Tony is really breaking him down inside. It is causing him a lot more trouble than he's able to handle. No matter how much he tries to deflect it or just pretend it's not bothering him. I think a good example of that is the episode in which Baron Zemo comes to the Avengers asking them for help, desperate because Amora the Enchantress is quite literally hunting down and killing her former associates in the Masters of Evil. And so they seek out the help of the Avengers, something that Tony is very iffy on giving as the team leader, even though they're quite literally dying. Like, the show, even though it's a kid's show, it makes it pretty clear, like, the Masters of Evil are really being picked off and dying one by one in horrific ways, mind you. Amora the Enchantress does not play. And in the end, it literally takes a self-sacrifice from Wonder Man just for the Avengers to be able to defeat Amora the Enchantress in general. Quite literally, Wonder Man, at least it's very much implied that he is dead, because he never comes back, but he is pure energy, so we never really know. But for the most part, Wonder Man's considered dead by a majority of the team and by the Masters of Evil. But Tony himself, he doesn't really accept this, at least not on a conscious level yet. He just kind of plays it off for jokes and laughs and kind of just pushes it to the side, even when he is confronted with it by his teammates, because that's just kind of how Tony is. He doesn't want to accept the fact that this life has extraordinary danger that comes with it, and that a lot of the people around him are ending up hurt, maimed, or dead.
Because of Wonder Man, with the Norn Stone's power, the Enchantress may very well have been unstoppable. Wonder Man's sacrifice saved us all.
Do you think she's gone for good?
It doesn't help that in the following episodes, the Earth is being invaded by aliens again, except in a far more public manner. Well, I would argue that Iron Man is in his best relationship-wise with the team by this point in the show, when it comes to fostering and building relationships with the different members of the Avengers. He's not exactly doing a great job at actually taking hold of the leadership role. When the Kree invade Earth, he has almost zero control over the situation as the quote-unquote leader of the Avengers. Captain America, who's a Skrull at this point, so who knows if real Cap would have done this? Probably not. But Captain America ends up taking charge in this discussion and quite literally leads to Earth, instead of trying to at least find a peaceful solution, go to straight out war with the Kree Empire, which is something that Tony very clearly did not want but had zero control over.
Attack! Cap!
but that Tony will most likely ultimately take the blame for because he is the leader of the Avengers. Like, he is the figurehead that Maria Hill yells at every single episode. It's also worth noting this episode introduces us formally to Captain Marvel in her superhero appearance. And that's even more evident when Captain Marvel starts speaking cryptically about how the Kree species are going to come back and probably make everybody's life a living hell because Iron Man, and by extension the Avengers, chose not to try to negotiate peace, despite how hard Captain Marvel desperately tried to get them to see it that way. And while all of these failures have compounded into leaving Iron Man a little bit shaky in his position as leader, it is truly the episode Invasion where he just loses it all. He's at the best point he has ever been in the show when it comes to relations with these characters and trusting of the other members of the Avengers, and that's all about to be shattered and taken away from him completely, to the point that he could never truly lead the Avengers properly after this incident. Tony is, for all intents and purposes, kidnapped by Black Widow, who is back, and I'll talk about her at some point eventually, because she actually plays a decent role in the second season, despite what I initially believed. But Tony ends up kidnapped and captured by Nick Fury, who goes on to reveal to him a gigantic conspiracy that is the Skrull invasion. Essentially, Skrulls have been invading different factions and members of Marvel's big institutions. Think Hydra, the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D., everybody. And it is eventually revealed to Tony that one of the members of his team is a Skrull. He has no way of knowing who on his team is a Skrull. He has no way of identifying and or trusting that person at all. Because the Skrulls don't just take on shape-shifting appearances, they take memories, thought patterns, mannerisms, everything. They are a perfect one-to-one copy of whoever they are trying to be.
I get back to my team.
Tony, the other communication came from your mansion. The Avengers have been infiltrated.
Now, honestly, I think it would have been a little cooler if Tony was smart enough to figure this out on his own. They already planted the seeds with Doctor Doom, and if he had figured this out on his own, it would have made him look a little bit more crazy with what he's about to do. But I understand why they did it the way they did. Keeps Tony painted in a pretty decent light. But this leaves him completely shaken on his core values of building a team that he trusted. Tony originally built the Avengers because he felt like he could not handle all of the threats by himself as a superhero. And so he formed the Avengers. And now all of that is being shaken. He's being told potential members of his team are compromised. He doesn't even know if Nick Fury is being real about any of this. Nick Fury could be a Skrull. He doesn't know. And his top listed person is supposed to be Clint Barton, someone he is not the closest with, but we see he cares for. So to Tony, this is extraordinarily harmful. And it's this episode that fundamentally shatters the Avengers in totality. Iron Man originally demands that Clint Barton turn himself over, and that he'll basically put Hawkeye in a holding cell until Hawkeye proves himself. This would be the second time Hawkeye will have been considered a traitor to his own people, and he can't go through with that again. So of course Hawkeye's not going to do this. He's going to do exactly what he did last time, which is stand and fight, which leads to a fracture in the Avengers. Certain members are going to side with Hawkeye, think Hulk, Captain America, Wasp, but other members of the team are not going to feel that way. Carol Danvers, for example. T'Challa goes full hands off and leaves. This one event shatters the Avengers because their leader is no longer there. He is no longer their leader, and he has fractured the team. He doesn't trust a single one of them.
I have to. I can't trust you. Any of you. Hulk and Wasp are already shape changers. Captain America could have been a Skrull from the day we found him. Ms. Marvel was working with an alien when we met her, and Panther. Panther was gathering information on all of us. He even hacked Jarvis for our files. And we just blew it off.
This whole endeavor leaves Iron Man feeling empty. He doesn't know what to believe anymore, he doesn't know what to do with himself, and there's only one thing that is on his mind, because he cannot trust anyone other than himself, and that is to figure out how to stop the Skrull invasion before it gets worse. We see some more MCU influences with the Malibu home and things like that, but dude pretty much blows off any calls he gets from the Avengers, from Pepper, Rhodey, anybody. He self-isolates completely, desperate to try and figure out how he can stop the Skrull invasion. And all that ends up leading to is nothing. Like, he can't get anywhere on his own. That is until Victor Von Doom shows up and chastises him like a child for destroying his device.
Us.
What do you know about the Skrulls?
That which you do not, Avenger. I know how to find them. I would have had the genetic key sooner, but you chose to destroy my scanner like an angry child.
Because, as per usual, Doctor Doom is like 7 steps ahead of everybody else and knew the Skrull invasion was happening well before the Avengers and probably before Nick Fury. And that's the whole reason he captured Susan Storm, was to analyze her as a Skrull, because he knew something was off. Mind you, what kind of like op shit are you on? That like you be monitoring your op's wife so much you notice when she is slightly different. It's wild. Regardless, Doctor Doom provides Iron Man with the tech needed to identify the Skrulls, and then dips, because he's not going to save the world. That's not his thing. So he integrates this chip in a plush Malibu mansion with all of the technology at his fingertips, and it honestly works pretty well. Actually, a little too well, because he's able to go show it off to Nick Fury, which is ultimately his undoing. Because unfortunately for everyone, the Madam Skrull, at least in this universe, is Mockingbird. Mockingbird is what Spider-Woman Jessica Drew was to this universe. So the Queen Skrull, instead of impersonating Spider-Woman, impersonates Mockingbird, which is something I didn't see coming. I fully expected it to be like, I don't know, Nick Fury, or like somebody of similar stature, maybe like Black Widow in this show. Was not expecting Mockingbird, so that was new, but also pretty welcome surprise. Unfortunately for Tony, this means that not only do the Skrulls now have his DNA, not only is he completely incapacitated, but there's nothing for him left. Also, shout out the X-Men references all over the 2nd season of this show.
Belong now. This is Queen Varenki. Iron Man and Nick Fury have been dealt with. Commence with invasion.
And man, Madam Skrull was not playing. Not in the slightest. She quite literally blows up every single institution on the planet that could be important. Avengers Mansion, blown up. She blows up the, well, doesn't blow up the Baxter building, but I think sends them to a different dimension. She blows up the Sword, which is like the Earth's space defense program that they've recently started. And the Avengers are pretty much in shambles right now. Only T'Challa was able to save them, and Iron Man's pretty much on the floor dying if it wasn't for the fact that Nick Fury and Maria Hill show up to save his life at the last second. That's twice now Maria Hill has saved his life. But thankfully for Tony, throughout all of this, he is not only able to persevere, but also survive. He's able to expose the Skrull menace for what they are, and thankfully gets his best buddy cop back, Captain America. But this irrevocably shakes the public's perception of the Avengers and of heroes in general. Iron Man, Captain America, the Avengers are no longer looked upon as heroes that are going out of their way to save the world, but as potential traitors, people that almost led to the humanity's demise as a whole. And Thor even echoes this sentiment at the end of the episode through a really insightful monologue he gives, even if it's a little cheesy.
Broken bones, destroyed buildings, these things are easily repaired. But broken friendships, broken trust, wounds such as these take much longer to heal.
Tony is kind of like Ultron's second dad. I'm gonna call him stepdad, because he really is the brainchild of Hank Pym. Ultron himself is still partially influenced by Tony. Tony's the reason Ultron has an attack mode. Tony's the reason Ultron has weapons on him. Tony is partly responsible for Ultron, and therefore he is also partly responsible for Vision as well. Not to as big of an extent as Hank Pym is, but he is technically responsible for both of those characters. and their existences. And he has to confront that throughout this episode. The idea that, yes, this is partially his fault, and yeah, it is kind of weird. But I'll be honest, they don't really frame the episode like that. Instead, it is much more about Janet, Vision, and Ultron himself, and far less about Tony, despite the fact that I feel like he should have had a little something in the episode, but I'll chalk it up to time constraints. And while we're on the topic of like episodes that I felt like Tony should have done a little bit more development in, but was pushed to the side for the sake of it being another character's episode, I want to mention Powerless real quick. It's one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, but honestly, Cap does more in this episode than Iron Man does, and it's really a Thor episode. The episode is really more for Thor than anything else, and Iron Man's just kind of tagging along. I think the episode that really forces Tony to take accountability for actions that he took in the previous season is the Yellow Jacket episode, and the entire arc surrounding Hank Pym's de-evolution, or evolution, into Yellow Jacket, depending upon how you look at it. When we first see Hank in this episode, he is incredibly messed up. He is malnourished, he is not focusing, he quite literally is doing nothing like progressive and or good for himself, and Tony views that as partially his fault. Him and Hank were extremely close, and Tony was the one who kept trying to push him to be a superhero and to push him out of his comfort zone. And I think that really weighs on him, especially in the way in which he talks to Hank.
Hank, I was glad to get your call, but to be honest, this is a disaster waiting to happen. When's the last time you slept? Or ate anything besides pizza?
And Tony feels especially responsible when they leave Hank Pym, essentially abandoning him because of what he's going through, and he ends up dying in what could be said as a word I can't say on YouTube type of event.
We didn't come here to remember an Avenger, or a scientist, or a man. We came to remember a dreamer who gave his life trying to make the world a safer place. Taken from us too soon, we will never forget our friend, Dr. Henry Pym.
They host a funeral for him, and they mourn who Hank Pym was, and it's a moment of realization for Tony Stark that he was constantly pushing and trying to force Hank to be somebody he wasn't. In his attempts to lead the Avengers and to be the guiding force on the team, he was trying to force Hank Pym into being something he wasn't. And unfortunately, that, in his mind at least, led to his friend having a mental breakdown and potentially getting himself killed. And it's only exacerbating the problem when there is found to be an IED device in the area, and so it's framed as an almost murder. And this just continues to get worse and worse. Janet eventually figures out that Yellow Jacket, the new superhero, anti-hero that's been going around the city, is Hank, but Tony doesn't want to believe it, that somebody so different from Hank himself could be Yellow Jacket.
Jan, we're all upset about Hank, but think about it. Think about what he did to the Constrictor. Hank was a pacifist. This thug can't possibly be the man we knew.
Because at the end of the day, Yellow Jacket was really everything Tony wanted out of Hank, right? He is brash and fearless. He jumps into the fray without thinking. He is able to effortlessly take down the villains with zero remorse or issue. He doesn't have to worry about rehabilitation. He doesn't have to worry about the ethics of what they're doing. To Hank, everything is fine when he's Yellow Jacket. And that's everything Iron Man wanted, right? But in the process, Iron Man ends up losing his closest friend, his oldest friend. He ends up losing Hank Pym to himself. Mental illness is a very serious issue, something I felt the show handled fairly decently, if not a little imperfectly. But I find it poignant that Iron Man, when finally accepting Hank Pym for who he was as Ant-Man in death, can no longer accept Hank Pym in life as the new person he has become, because he is so drastically different to the man that he really wanted from Hank. I don't know if that makes sense in the way I just said it, but essentially, Hank is now the man that Iron Man wanted him to be so long ago, but he has just now finally found appreciation for who Hank was previously. And so he doesn't actually invite Hank to the team. He instead decides that Yellow Jacket doesn't have a place on the team, at least in his current form, and it takes Janet convincing him for Iron Man to finally accept Hank for who he is now.
I think we spent too long wanting you to be someone you weren't, instead of appreciating who you were.
You want an Avenger who gets the job done right. Here I am.
Hank Pym is dead and gone, and Tony has to accept that he played a role in doing that to one of his closest friends. His leadership style played a role in doing that. And unfortunately for him, it's something that will probably never sit with Tony properly. And as well, would never sit with me properly. I'd feel horrible. And this is all in the pursuit of Tony making a safer and better future for all of those around him. At least that's where the core idea of this all comes into place. So what does that future look like exactly? Well, we get an episode kind of looking at what that future would be like. The episode starts with Vision basically being repaired post the Ultron episode, and it's gonna take a month. So for 30 days, the Avengers are supposed to just go on about their days and kind of do whatever. But unfortunately, during those 30 days, we get to meet one of my least favorite villains of all time, and that's Purple Man. First of all, them using Purple Man in a kids' TV show has always been wild to me, because his character is almost synonymous with... No, not almost. It is synonymous with sexual abuse and sexual assault. And that's something that is not... It's just not something I thought would be part of a kids' TV show. But it is throughout this episode that we get to see at least a version of the future that Tony Stark could be creating. Purple Man uses his influence to take over the world by using the face of Tony Stark, the futurist, the man who was going to make everything so much better. Takes over the UN, takes over the country, and takes over the Earth, is at least what they imply throughout this episode. So yeah, Tony rules the world and creates his perfect future. Or more aptly, the Purple Man's perfect future, by twisting what Tony wants to do when it comes to protecting the world.
I agree. It doesn't make sense at all. You've created the perfect world, Tony. People should just sit back and enjoy it.
Throughout the episode, they play up the themes and ideals that Tony wants this world. This is eventually everything he is working towards. Even if he doesn't want it to be this authoritarian, this is what he's trying to get to eventually. This is where he wants to be eventually. A world where his suits are protecting everyone. We see this idea kind of mirrored in the MCU during Iron Man 3 and Avenger Age of Ultron, but, you know, that is neither here nor there.
Look at you, the noble hero. Don't pretend like all of this wasn't your idea in the first place. Everything I've made you do in the last few weeks, it all came from you. I just gave you the push you needed.
And I think it's this episode that finally puts the nail in the coffin for Tony wanting any sort of leadership position. He built the Avengers because he felt like he could not protect the planet himself and to build the future of safety that he wanted to. He has been proven time and time again that the Avengers ultimately cause more harm than good and end up having to avenge the harm that they have caused instead of preventing harm, which is what Tony wanted. He is obsessed with legacy and the idea of what happens after he is gone because he wants to be looked upon in a favorable light. He wants the heroes of his time to be looked upon as bastions of hope, of what the future could be, what it could be when it's better, right? So for Tony to fall victim to the Purple Man's influence like this, to build a world that is technically perfect, but lacks any sort of freedoms in general, is quite honestly the opposite of what Tony would have ever wanted, even if a lot of these designs were partially in his mind. And even when the day is won, he feels nothing but doubt at his actions. Doubt and sadness that he let something like this happen. Even if no one blames him, he blames himself. And it takes a rousing speech from Captain America for Tony to just believe in himself.
No. You shook Purple Man's control. So did the others. And everything Purple Man had me do, it was all inside me. They were all ideas I had. I'm supposed to be the futurist, working to build a better tomorrow. What I did? Is that the future I've been working toward?
And this truly solidifies one of my favorite relationships in this show, which is Tony Stark and Captain America's friendship. I think it's fairly underrated in this show, and honestly, to me, riffs on a lot of what Batman and Superman do for each other when they're at their best as a buddy cop duo, and I find it really enjoyable. I find it enjoyable that as though Tony is a futurist and always looking towards what they could be, it's really Captain America that reins him and grounds him in the present, and understanding what he can and can't do properly. Which leads us, of course, naturally to something like this's conclusion. Tony Stark no longer believes himself capable of being the leader of the Avengers properly, and he finally admits this to Captain America, and the arc is coming full circle on his leadership. All of Season 1 was about building him up as a leader and how he was going to handle leadership. Season 2 was deconstructing it, and for Tony to realize that he is not the man to lead the Avengers, and that is okay.
It took a while for you to catch up to the 21st century, but now that you're here, you are the face of the Avengers. You're the leader we need.
Tony even admits it. The team before Captain America showed up was lacking something. It was lacking heart, and it was lacking that true face that never gives up. And Captain America has that. And so Iron Man kind of takes a back seat for the next few episodes, because they're far more Captain America centric. Well, Iron Man is there and often acts as moral support for Captain America, always backing him up. He doesn't really do anything that is worth us talking about that I haven't already spoke about in Captain America's video that is going to be in the playlist that I should hopefully link in the description if I'm a good YouTuber like I should be. But this all unfortunately kind of gets thrown away in a really weird episode that I'm almost never sure where it fits. If like it is supposed to be episode 22, is it out of order? Did they just let somebody else write this episode? I have personally never been able to understand why the deadliest man alive just feels so out of place, especially with the way it characterizes some of the people in this show. For example, they straight up completely Flanderize Hawkeye and essentially just make him abandon Hulk. In that whole relationship, they spent all this time building up and they just threw it away as though it was nothing. All in the attempt to make Captain America look really good, which I agree, Captain America looks great in this episode from a character standpoint, but they did it at the detriment to like everybody else. For example, Iron Man just completely gives up on Hulk and gives up on one of his oldest teammates at the slightest hint that Hulk isn't acting like himself, despite having already gone through a Skrull invasion or, you know, Purple Man's existence. They also took forever in getting the Hulk out as well. Like, the Skrull invasion has been over for almost half the season now, and they still left this man to rot.
To track him. As soon as we have a lock on his position, we're heading out. Understand. We have to be prepared in case things go south.
But yeah, Tony has like very little interest in actually saving what is supposedly one of his friends. I mean, the interactions between him and Hulk are very, very cordial throughout the first half of this season, and it seems like they are far closer now than they were previously. So to me, it just feels weird and disconnected. Now, we do get a cool look at Hulkbuster 2.0, but outside of all of that, like, this episode just feels weird to me, and it always has felt weird in the way in which characters are portrayed. Particularly just how accepting the team is of Red Hulk. Like, they don't even think about how Hulk may be being manipulated, but they're like, oh yeah, Red Hulk had some mind control going on, and, you know, he's got some good PR, so let's fast track him to being on the team. Mind you, Spider-Man had to go through like a whole episode of development to even get a spot on the team. Actually, 2 episodes of development. But Red Hulk fast track him straight to the team. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Think about what this team deals with on a daily basis. Having a Hulk on the roster, especially one that won't take your head off if someone puts too much cream in his coffee, that's firepower we can use. And he wants in.
And what about Bruce? Do we just leave him locked up?
Like, if I'm missing something about this episode or, like, misunderstanding, please let me know in the comments. I know at the end of this episode, like, Tony had precautions in place in case Red Hulk wasn't who he said he was. But I mean, he played goody with the media, he slandered Hulk's name, he left his own friend to rot, was quick to replace him because this version of the Hulk, you don't have to worry about him tearing your head off at any given moment, which you never had to worry about with the previous version of Hulk anyways. It just makes me wonder why it's written like this, because it just feels like flanderization of Iron Man, Hawkeye specifically, all at the expense of making Captain America and Wasp look really, really good. And to me, that's frustrating. Also a bit of flanderization on Thor's part, because I don't think Thor would have given up that easily on his friends. Okay, rant about Deadliest Man Alive over, and why I think it feels like a regression on Tony's character arc.
A little insurance, just in case you weren't exactly the lovable Boy Scout your PR was selling.
Actually, one last quick thing. The show also acts like Tony's still leader of the team throughout this episode, despite, like, 3 episodes ago, him relinquishing leadership. Again, makes me wonder if I'm maybe watching this episode a little out of order based on what it is. For me, it's listed as episode 22. So I'm actually going to go check real quick what the air date is versus the production date of this episode. So after a little bit of looking, it aired as episode 22 and was produced as episode 22 of the show from everything I can find online. Again, if you have a source, please correct me down below. I'll leave a heart on your comment. But getting back to more truly important things, a lot of what we've talked about in this video regarding Iron Man has been about legacy and how the Avengers will look when everything is said and gone. And what better episode to frame legacy around than with Kang the Conqueror, one of the Avengers' first truly multi-episode big bads. That was my starting point in watching the show, as Kang was always just an interesting character to me. And in this entire episode, the premise is that the Avengers, in their totality, have been wiped out. They're all gone and dead. But Tony went out of his way to set up a backup plan, a recovery, if you will, just in case the Avengers, for whatever reason, were MIA for 2. And that is the New Avengers Initiative. Iron Man had picked out like 6 or 7 different heroes that we've seen throughout the show. Fantastic Four was supposed to be included in its totality, I believe, but I think only Ben Grimm was available for this episode. But it consists of the heroes for hire, so Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Spider-Man, Wolverine, which, yes, does confirm that, like, X-Men, Wolverine and the X-Men takes place in the same universe as the show, which, again, I don't know how any of these characters would let Sentinels be flying around, but don't even get me started. Rhodey gets to be War Machine. Other characters are involved, or actually, I believe that's all of them. Regardless, these are the New Avengers. Essentially, Iron Man has always been planning for the future. What happens when he is not there, when the Avengers aren't there anymore. So he picked a group of heroes, partly just based on who could appear in the show, to be the future. It's a really fun episode, and one I don't often get to talk a whole lot about, simply because the Avengers aren't in this episode as characters, so there's almost no reason to. So I'm using Iron Man's video as an excuse to say how much I love this episode, and also to say how disappointed I am that Josh Keaton was not the official Spider-Man like he was originally planned to be for this show, because, man, I can only imagine him in this episode and in the Captain America episode. It could have been so amazing. And Spider-Man, yes, Spider-Man, after 2 appearances in the show of working with the Avengers, earns his card, but Red Hulk gets it. I'm not going to get into that. Not going to get into that. And after that, we're pretty much in the end game. There's not really, in all honesty, a whole lot to talk about for the Kree 2-parter in which the Avengers go to the Kree homeworld. I felt like Black Panther had a lot more to talk about. Captain America had more to talk about in that episode. Captain Marvel, when I make her video, will have a lot more to talk about. But as it stands for Iron Man, dude's just kind of there and along for the ride, so I don't have a lot to say about him. And it's more as we get towards the finale of the show that I have a lot more to say about Iron Man. If you've been taking a shot for every time I've said Iron Man in this video, please seek medical attention at this point. because I think I have it like referenced 100 times in my script. I know some of you guys comment that, so seek medical attention. I think the finale is a really great look into how Tony feels and wants the Avengers to be remembered. The episode starts with the fact that Tony himself is really contemplating what it looks like when he's gone, trying to imagine a world without himself. And while we've seen him do it in actions, we've never actually seen him contemplate what that looks like, genuinely trying to look at what it is and how he'll be remembered, especially as he laments this to Captain America.
You ever stop to wonder how history will remember us? I never have, but now I can't shake it. The Avengers have fought supervillains, evil robots, even monsters from the negative zone. But things have gotten worse lately. The Kree, Kang, What?
This is only the second time I've heard you use the word history.
That's because I've never been able to imagine a world without me in it. Until recently.
And it's really the final conclusion and wrap-up to his story arc. He's passed on leadership roles to Captain America. He has taken more time out of being Iron Man to look at the people around him, namely on his team, and accept them for who they are and not try to change them. As well, Tony has finally realized that the world is not going to look upon the Avengers as failures or easily infiltrated, as people that could not save the Earth, but instead, rather, they're going to look upon the Avengers as heroes, the people who are able to save the day and to unite a whole host of heroes across the globe in order to be better, in order to be the future protectors of Earth, whether or not the Avengers survive today or tomorrow. And while Tony might not have changed from being a somewhat pedantic prick throughout this TV show, he was never going to, but instead his state of mind, and his ability to look at himself and his team has changed. It took him giving up leadership to show that he was a true leader, if that makes sense. By being the best leader he could, he understood that it became no longer about him, but by delegating. And for that reason, the Avengers will be remembered as heroes.
You wanted to know how history will remember the Avengers, Iron Man? Well, here's your answer.
I don't think a lot of you, especially like the demographic of my channel is pretty much people my age, but pre-2008, man, Iron Man had no motion. Like, zero. Before Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man was down bad. He was not moving well. He was like a B-list hero. And it really took RDJ's performance, and I'd argue bits and pieces of this TV show, to skyrocket Iron Man into the popularity that he has today. Much to my sadness. Because believe it or not, despite the fact that I've spent the last almost 45 minutes glazing this interpretation of Iron Man and talking about him, I hate Iron Man. I hate Iron Man with a passion, actually. Iron Man in the comic books pre-Robert Downey Jr. and even post-Robert Downey Jr. is like if you gave Elon Musk a super suit and let him do whatever the hell he wanted. We're pretty close to the second part of that description, but yeah, Iron Man, I don't even know how he's considered a good guy half the time. Like, if you read Civil War, he's just straight up a villain. And that was my first real look at Iron Man in the comic books, and it made me realize just how different he is there. He's an asshole. His literal biggest demon is drinking. And now, I understand a lot of this is very, very rich, coming from a guy who very much enjoys Emma Frost as a character. And I see the hypocrisy in this statement. But I don't like Iron Man. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize when a version of his character is done so well that it captures the eyes and ears and partially reshapes how the character is looked at to a lot of people. I feel the same way about Iron Man that I feel about Jean, but I dislike those two characters for different reasons. Again, very rich coming from a dude who likes Emma Frost for more than just her outfit choices. But yeah, I had to get that off my chest because I don't like the guy. But I do, it's complicated. Just like how it's complicated with Jean. Anyways, thank you for listening to like my almost hour-long ramble on Iron Man from Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I really enjoy getting to do this. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I wanted to get this video out way sooner, but Marvel Rivals has absolutely destroyed my ability to like be a YouTuber. All I've wanted to do is play that game, and so this video got delayed multiple times because of it. It's like blame NetEase. Anyways, I truly appreciate each and every one of you who took the time to watch this video. Your viewership is way, way, way appreciated, so thank you all so much. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you dislike the video, leave a dislike, and then comment down below telling me why you dislike the video, as that helps me as a content creator to continue to make better content for all of you guys, constructive criticism, all that fun stuff. If you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsub later. As well, I run a Patreon in which you can find each and every one of these videos unedited and early, as well as getting access to the community Discord where you can interact with me, and a couple other perks, such as getting your name shouted out at the end of each and every one of my videos if you're in the $5 or above tier. So without further ado, shout out Roderick Hare, shout out Easterbird13, Gabriel LaFonte, Transgurs1, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You all are amazing. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.